Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝗃𝗀𝗀, licensed agent with Second City Real Estate. With me, as always, is Mark 𝗬𝗁, founder and owner of 𝗤𝚻𝗱𝗰𝗀𝘀. Mark, how you doing? It's been a while.
It has been. It has been. We went. We got almost to the end of running out of shows for this. Kind of the first time we did that, and now we've got a whole bunch of them lined up. So it's kind of funny. In the ebbs and flows.
Yeah, we've been trying to be more real time, just because the market could and will be shifting. We think so. We're trying to be more just in time inventory for you accountants out there.
We should go live. That's what we got to talk about next. So
there you go.
What book you reading right now, or what have you read recently? Anything interesting?
Actually, not real estate related. It's somewhat real estate related, but I read a book called 𝗦𝘁𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀 City, which was about the Chicago fire. So when I was on vacation, this was my non self-development, non-real estate, like just, hey, some cool little history nerd thing to read. And it's an academic book. So I'll preface with that, but I thought it was awesome for you nerds who love Chicago, like Mark and I do. Like, it's probably a good investment. But it talks about the aftermath of the fire and just kind of the craziness that you don't realize. So just, you had a fourth of the city is now homeless, but 3/4 of the city is not really affected. You had like both, social aristocrats and just peasants living in the streets together. And a lot of the insurance like policies, they didn't have capital to back this all up. So a lot of small shops are, a lot of people didn't cushion the blow. So all you had was this lot. So there were people who might've been like your competitor who just lost everything. And all they have now is a lot. And they're on the street with bums, and they used to be, living large. And it's just funny about like, there's like empathy. There's also like, ooh, this is going to help my business. And they have like a lot of oral history about that. And just the few days after the fact, it was all the criminals were freed from the prisons. Like, it was kind of martial law for about 2 weeks. And then going from there, like, I won't be too long winded here, but rebuilding the city is like the bulk of the book. And it's just phenomenal. It talks about just, they wanted to mandate that it had to be mason, it had to be brick. Obviously, if you were on the poorer end of the financial scale, you didn't want that because of the expense. And so while they're like negotiating this, like as many wooden shanties were built as possible before that potentially became law. It didn't, obviously. And it talks about like the tradesmen at the time. They're similar to now, like they're like the COVID essential workers. They had a lot of leverage, a lot of power, and it really helped the unions as they went from, they'd just gotten to an 8-hour working day. Like, this was, 1871, conditions were pretty rough. But like they talk like the masonry union does a very good job of having reasonable demands, gets them met, and they get to a point where they're solid. And then the carpenter union had a lot more spite with the city. They were less specialized, and they were making bigger requests. And the city responded by sending people out to all these different cities and saying, hey, come to Chicago and you can make X. And, they did. And they did not end up in the same position as the masonry guys. So it's pretty fascinating, like the economics behind it. And like, there's still stuff to this day because of situations made back then.
I'm pretty excited. I'm going fishing next week, so I think I'm gonna have to pick that up on my way. It's a good read while I'm off. So I love it.
It's good. And in true Chicago fashion, the treasurer embezzled $500,000, which is like $1 billion in today's money. Like, you had all these people pouring funds in, and it didn't help.
Yeah, there's always leakage on those things. Like, whenever it's a horrible thing to say, but whenever you see these disasters and you see these funds pop up, and there's always somebody trying to take advantage of it. I can only imagine that was happening back then as well too.
Yeah. So it was good though. Like a lot, it's pretty nerdy, but like it's, if you're into that stuff, like I would highly recommend it. 𝗦𝘁𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 City.
All right. Love it. Love it.
So maybe, I don't remember the author's name. Maybe we'll get him on.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
let's get back into real estate though. It's kind of tied in, but what do we got for the housing provider tip of the week?
It's totally about real estate. It's literally every piece of real estate burning to the ground.
Yeah, that's true.
So you can always group it back to real estate. But today's tip, so recently we took over management. We had a bunch of clients buy a bunch of new construction. These 3 flats have been popping up around the city, and we had a couple of new construction in the suburbs as well too. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you're gutting your house out, or maybe you're taking one of these old houses and redoing it, and the positioning of where you put your AC or your HVAC unit, and the engineering around that, the airflow and all that stuff, everyone kind of takes that for granted. So if you're gutting out your place, make sure that you have somebody that's giving you the good information of how things should be vented, where the unit should be located, whether it be in the basement or the attic or the downflow, upflow. Because what happened with a lot of these new construction buildings we have right now is literally based on the poor positioning of the HVAC unit. The other half of the house is there's these cold spots and in the winter, and there's these hot spots in the summer because the air is not pushing itself all the way there. So if you're rehabbing a house and you just get any HVAC guy that just you're gonna throw him a few grand to put something in there, like it might be a good investment to actually have somebody that understands the technical piece of airflow and make sure air is getting to every corner of your house.
Yeah, it's not just kitchens and baths.
Exactly. So, all right, cool. I am excited about today's show. This is a topic that we haven't talked much about, but I get a lot of questions, and I'm going to be just as curious as you listeners out there today. So I'm excited. So today, our guest, he's the founder and principal of West Loop Capital Partners. It's an investment firm that owns and operates multifamily properties in the Bridgeport and Pilsen neighborhoods. His first acquisition was a condo in 2012, and in the years that followed, he built a small portfolio of turnkey condo units in the Loop to run as short-term rentals. In 2016, he switched gears to acquiring add value properties, and today runs 100% of his current 36 apartment unit portfolio as midterm monthly furnished rentals. Oh man, furnished just scares me. Prior to becoming a full-time investor, he served as an investment advisor to family offices and real estate professionals in the Midwest after graduating school at University of Chicago. He currently lives in New York, and he's managing his portfolio remotely here in Chicago, which is an exciting topic for me as well too, and is active in the prop tech investment space. Without further ado, I want to introduce Rishi Bajaj. I'm going to tell you guys, listeners, the bio, the intro never makes me nervous. It's always introducing people and their names. So if I said it wrong, please correct me, and so the audience knows it correctly.
Yeah, it's Rishi. You did a fine job.
I don't get stressed out much, but that literally is something that stresses me out going into a show if I know I got to do the intro part.
I think you did great. Only up from here too.
All right, awesome. Well, man, I'm excited to have you on here. You and me have been talking for many years now about odds and ends. We've referred some resources back and forth to each other. Your partners with another good friend of mine. I love to kind of hear just kind of what that journey looked like from the beginning, like mentally, and what motivated you to get into this, and kind of where your head was at back in 2012. Did you see this is where it was going, or is this kind of built itself along the way?
Sure. I mean, first, I think you were a bit too gracious there on how we know each other. The referrals, the information has all been one way, you to me, and you've been so extremely helpful with pretty much every acquisition in the last 4 years that I've had, whether it's been for referrals or general advice. So thanks so much. You really have been instrumental in how the portfolio is doing. So thank you. But yeah, so 2012, how I got started in this space and kind of evolved in growing the portfolio and evolved in what rental strategies that we employed. So 2012, I was in business school, did a Euro trip with my friends, a friend of mine who booked all the accommodations. She sent, where we're staying and everything. And one of them I noticed wasn't a hotel, and it had a link to Airbnb. And I asked more about it, and she was like, "Yeah, this is actually someone's apartment that we're staying in." And I thought, well, hey, maybe I should do that while we're on this trip with my rental unit, which was Michigan and Randolph. I mean, prime location. It was Labor Day, and I just cleaned up that week and a half, paid for my rent and a half, or next kind of month's rent and a half, and thought I just struck gold, and continued to do that. Financed a lot of business school expenditures that obviously wasn't working. So it was definitely necessary. And from there, started working. Every bonus or everything I saved, I would just try to expand on this idea, and I would buy turnkey condos in the Loop and turn them into short-term rentals. and was doing very well until about 2014, whenever I think Airbnb kind of had more notoriety associated with it, and doormen and management companies became kind of wise to the idea and enforced their bylaws more stringently. And essentially it was the decision, the bylaws say 30 days is the minimum, and it can't be 2 and 3 nights that I had been doing. So my decision was, do I rent this on a 12-month basis or, try this 30-day thing? The utilities are already set up, furniture's in there. So I rented on a 30-day basis. And I found that I was netting actually more money because there wasn't the automatic hotel tax deduction. I wasn't needing to get it cleaned 4 times a month. Sometimes the people would stay for 3 months at a time. And so I saw that, I'm making more than what I would have if I had done this on a normal 12-month rental. And it's actually more profitable, even though the top line's not as high than a short-term rental, just because of all the additional expenses associated with that. So I kind of ran with that idea, turned everything into monthly rentals. And then from there, it was, I wanted more control over or I wanted to juice the returns by doing value add and updating kitchens and baths. And that's led us to now having 6 buildings, primarily Bridgeport and Pilsen.
Awesome. For anyone, we had episode 143, Jessica Ryan was on here, who's an attorney that gave the whole history of how the condo associations jumped on board, the city put the regulations in place. So it's a good topic to kind of go alongside what you just mentioned there. But before you got great success now, and we're going to dive into that here, but it sounded like you're living, I don't know if the right word's frugal, but you're saving all your money. Like give us some ideas what living scrappy was for you. Because I always like to hear different hacks that people do to save money.
Oh, in terms of operating the properties, or?
No, when you said you were saving money up and trying to put your next down payment, were you eating ramen noodles? Like were you sleeping with only a sheet, no blanket? Like tell us how you were scrappy.
Sure. I guess the scrappiest thing was the condo that I bought during business school was pretty much an Airbnb house hack, where it was a 2-bed, 2-bath. And I just saw how much money Airbnb was making renting the entire apartment. And I thought, instead of getting a roommate, let me try to just Airbnb that second bedroom. And it sometimes paid for the entire mortgage. It was interesting in that you'd have different people living in your space, and absolutely would not do that today. I'm married. That would just definitely not fly. But it was something where, a second bedroom, no one would ever think, that it would cover an entire 2-bed, 2-bath mortgage in the West Loop. But that was probably the scrappiest thing. I definitely got, the strange looks from friends whenever I had them over on Sunday for football. I was like, who is that person putting stuff in the fridge? But it paid the bills. So, in that position, I'd do the same thing today.
I love it. You realize that's the original definition of house hacking when you actually, it's transferred into flats and stuff like that. But that's what I did. It wasn't strangers. All my friends when I was 21, when they're getting kicked out of their houses for doing whatever stupid they did, they come and live on my couch or live in the bedroom, and I charge them, and I paid for my whole rent most months. Or my whole mortgage. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. So we mentioned, we'll talk about the strategy here, but one thing that came up was furnishing. And I think it's an overlooked, whether you're doing like true short-term rentals on the weekend or like the midterm over 30 days. Can you give a rough idea of cost to furnish, let's call it a 2-bed, 2-bath condo, like you mentioned? Or at least considerations, maybe not numbers, but what do you need to consider for furnishing to provide the appropriate experience?
Sure. I think what gets kind of not talked about enough in this space is the logistics and time, more so than just the cost of the sofa or the cost of the bed. You can absolutely be super frugal and do the Facebook marketplace and get everything for, primarily we have 1 bed, 1 bath, or 2-bed, 1 baths. So I'll kind of, use that. Our cost all in, we'll say, is $8,000. And we're not putting, it's mostly Amazon and Walmart.com because it gets delivered and the timing is much more predictable, and we can schedule, the furniture assembly team, and you should account for at least the cost of the furniture is also going to be the cost of the labor, whether to bring it inside, and the mountain of cardboard that results is just super annoying to deal with. The amount of box cutters that we go through, and when you don't have recycling at some of the properties, the bin, they just put it, City of Chicago just takes the blue one into the same trash. And it's unfortunate, but I mean, these are things that all have to be thought through. The logistics is something a lot of people say it's 1 week or 2-3 days. I would account for at least 10 days. And if you're going to do it right, where you're putting furniture sliders on everything, because at least in monthly rentals, everyone's going to move around the furniture. No one's going to like where it was originally placed. And not just the adhesive furniture sliders, like we only do the screw-in one. So there's all these little things, little details that if you want if you don't want maintenance calls for the first 3 months at least, you really have to put the heavy duty stuff in. So that reinforcing that kind of customization, because each one bedroom, even if they're in the same building, they might have their own different little quirks. Those things to work through do take time, and the logistics and planning is significant as well.
That's awesome. So that's a tip I would have just done the little crappy adhesives. Like if I was,
I didn't even know they made those. Yeah, I got my house. Yeah, that's awesome.
The reason why is that these, after a year, these things are sliding up the sides, and just Google search heavy duty furniture sliders, because you want ones, or I thought it would just be a stronger glue, and these actually can screw in, and those have stayed.
Mine's full of dog hair. Mine are always full of dog hair, right? And they get they lose their thickness. So I'm definitely gonna use
anything adhesive. All our LED light strips. That's the next thing. How to try to put those on without adhesive. I'm trying to do everything hardware. I mean, what's annoying is that those are so available on the market, and they're easy solutions. If you live in the place, because you're fine with dealing with it. But 2 months later, whenever you see all the residue, the adhesive residue and everything else associated, it's all these little things that you don't want that first impression to be. So,
yep. What are just some, we'll talk a little about why you do 30 days and just the logistics behind it. But before going there, what are some additional costs that you need to account for compared to someone who's doing a 12-month lease?
Sure, absolutely. And I like this question because it's something that, if you have partners on a project or investors, and you're doing a mini syndication, what's really important is to coach the partners and make sure they know that the refi, the cash out, the immediate kind of return of some capital is going to be very, very different, and you shouldn't kind of be judged by or compared to other kind of GPs or operators that they invest in, because furniture, absolutely. So 8,000 for a 1-bedroom, but if you're a 12-month operator, you're not going to necessarily need to put keypad locks on all of them. And so the basic keypad lock is $50. But if you really want to make it an efficient system, you have to buy the $200 one, the one that links to a smart home system where you can change the code. There's another thing. So locks, anything from, there's a lot of different things we do construction wise that cost a little more just to make the place more durable, but also more manageable. So a lot of things with electric in the stairwells, because you're going to need to have wireless routers, you're going to have the modems, you're going to need temperature sensors, you need more electrical on the exterior of buildings, and because you need your cameras, you need to make sure that lawn care and snow care or snow removal came. And then you're going to want like a stocked supply room, right? You're not going to want to just, oh, it's 8,000 and then it's done. You need to have backups for a lot of stuff. So, we have central air in a lot of our units, but we have backup, say for a 6 unit, we'll have 2 backup window AC units, because we know that maybe one furnace goes down or one condenser goes down. They're going to need some sort of cooling, and same thing with space heaters, backup microwave. I mean, you want to have backups there so that you could direct the residents to, oh, here's an interim solution, we'll get it fixed, but just so you're not really suffering for those 2 days until we can get it fixed.
I think that's a good tip for anybody with a multifamily to have those type of backups, because there's nothing more aggravating to a tenant, and nothing more, especially when it comes to cold. There's a lot of risk around that with the city and the fines, and they got to call 911. So to have space heaters hand, or we started using, because we do scattered for the most part, so it's harder you can't put one at all 1,200 units, but we just simply send messenger services with the units that we have stored at our office. So it's kind of a little hack, so we don't got to pay someone to run over there.
Smart.
That's good. One more thing on this. Let's talk about some of the monthly bills. Like, do you have to provide internet, Netflix? You're paying the utilities, because I see a lot of times like, hey, the long-term rent is whatever, $1,200 a month. I can double that here, but your profit's not going to double. It still might be a better solution, but there are other expenses that you need to account for. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of those so they can underwrite appropriately.
Absolutely. Utilities they can get out of control, right? And so, yeah, we've tried to find ways on how, especially because, some of the residents will stay for 3-4 months. It's just no competition is passing through those costs. And so it's something that you do need to absorb. But yeah, for sure, internet, probably the number one utility that you need to provide when you have an entire building operating that way. You can kind of minimize that cost with, especially if you have smaller units, you might only need 2 for every 6 units with a mesh network. That's kind of what we do. But it's interesting you say, I think you mentioned just the amount of for heating and cooling is something that it's an obstacle that we've just experienced, particularly this year, given the rise in remote workers. So, it's fine. We absolutely allow the ability for, the digital nomad crowd and people to work out of the place, but that really increases the utility costs. And there's not really a way to be able to say you have to pay a little more because you're going to be in the space and blasting the AC 16 hours or 24 hours a day, versus if it were a traveling nurse where they're only home or in the apartment for 12 hours a day. You can limit, there's the thermostat, smart thermostats have X limit that you can do. It's just never received well. We've tried it, and ultimately we want the residents to be happy and to be able to feel like it is their apartment, and all those controls don't really mesh well with that.
That's interesting. So in the ideal world, like you would get, like your ideal client, if you could somehow market to the persona, would be the traveling nurse compared to the digital nomad, which in my eyes before this conversation, I'd be like, well, it's the same thing. Cool. They're going to pay me 3 months. I didn't even realize that, you're going to take a hit on the utilities there.
Me too. From like 2016 till 2020, I thought the exact same, just like what you said. And I've only learned after looking at the bills that, oh, wow, this is and I mean, increase in maintenance, and they're in the place for so much longer. So they notice the littlest of things and they want them fixed. Whereas maybe those individuals working in a hospital, they're maybe too tired to report these little issues or just don't care. But there's significant additional cost to the rise and here's the thing, they do pay listed rates more. They're less, when you have a monthly rental, especially on Airbnb, almost all the time you're going to get the request for a discount because of X, Y, and Z. So one good thing about, the remote workers is that they don't do it as much. And so you get higher rates, but I would say that it ends up being about the same. It's just there may be more headaches and a lot more messages and communications and, handymen having to visit when you host those types of those professionals.
Got it. So your advertising, is it strictly just we put this on Airbnb and then we build up the reputation and just like you would on like the short-term rentals? I guess as someone who's doing 32 plus days, is your advertising different? Are you going direct to some of these, call it corporations or relocation places, or is it still strictly just enough business on Airbnb?
So both. I think there is enough business on Airbnb, but one of my key focuses is to strengthen the relationships that we have and grow the kind of more direct booking, not necessarily just you go to our website and book the place, but we have some relationships with healthcare staffing companies who they're the ones that manage the traveling physical therapists. And then we have somewhat of a relationship. I'm trying to grow it more with some Broadway agents because I think 4 of our apartments right now, so Devil Wears Prada is a Broadway show in Chicago now. And 4 of our apartments are actors and actresses through that. So almost all the time. And then the one thing that I just started maybe a few months ago when we got our first off Airbnb booking for this kind of separate use case is insurance companies who have, or the relocation companies that work with insurance companies for residents who are displaced due to some weather, a fire or flood, and their stay is covered because the insurance covers it. And so that's absolutely where I think we're going to get a lot more consistent and less headache-filled bookings going forward. And I'm in that mindset that whenever we always get the background of whoever books on Airbnb. And so, for example, with someone who booked because they were here for assignment for Uber Freight, and they were there for 9 weeks or something. And he said, "Oh, I'm one of these parts of groups, and they're doing rotations throughout the year." And so he's put me in touch with their recruiting manager to maybe for the future ones book directly or have an actual lease because it's more predictable and they at least have that experience that we're a legit company and have nice places.
So you're at about 20% of, call it corporate rentals. We'll just use that for lack of better. What do you think you could get it to, or what's your goal like of these relationships that you're fostering?
For sure. I 50-50 is the goal. So 50 Airbnb and 50 direct is kind of a soft goal that I have for the next 2 years. It's just Airbnb owns all the traffic. So many times, like I mentioned, the person who worked for Uber, I mean, they were directed by Uber to go on Airbnb. A lot of, they're in the space and they make their own push. Airbnb does for now. Hey, we're doing this special thing for month-long stays. And I mean, they know what they're doing and they know how to get the traffic. So I don't think it'll ever be 100% and direct, because Airbnb is a very forward-thinking company in terms of how to grow their user set. But they charge the fee, right? And we net a lot more money, and it's better to have actual written lease in place when we do direct bookings through, the actress's agent or recruiting manager, things like that.
All right. So you said soft goal, but we're going to officially make it a hard goal for you to be 50-50 by July 2024. And we're going to follow up with you to make sure you hit your goal. So
I appreciate that. I need that accountability.
I think you should do it 2023. Like I think you're going to, you're not pushing hard enough, man. Come on. A few phone calls and get this done, man, next week. So why Bridgeport? Why that part of the city? How'd you end up there? You weren't living there. Like, give us kind of a breakdown of why there.
Yeah. So I think first multifamily was in West Pilsen, then shortly thereafter was Bridgeport. And I think
when you say West Pilsen though, like, are you West Pilsen to some people can be Cicero.
East of Western. I love how you guys joke about this, because I mean it's something I laugh about all the time too. So technically it's heart of Chicago.
All right, so you are there. You are there. You're touching Pilsen.
So we just finished, or I mean, it's 2 months young now, fully stabilized one on, it's like, 19th east of Ashland. So I have an East Pilsen and a West Pilsen, and that's kind of in my head how I delineate. But yeah, I always laugh when you guys talk about that, because you can go all the way to California and people are claiming it's Pilsen, right?
I had a guy, it was on the park across from the jail over there in 26 in California. And he said, he's from out of state, so he doesn't know, like we know him, but he said that was heart of Chicago. Heart of Chicago, Little Italy is what he told me. He's like, I'm excited to be here. I'm like, oh man, that's it's a little village, not Little Italy. So.
But yeah, so your question, why those neighborhoods? I think, we get the benefit with monthly rentals where these residents aren't viewing the place and have less familiarity with Chicago than others who have lived in the city and lived in other neighborhoods and know the differences between them. And so when you're looking at a map and okay, I have this internship downtown, I want to be somewhere where I can be somewhat close to it, but I don't want to pay X amount of price. Bridgeport to the Bean, say, is basically the same distance as Wicker Park is, but the cap rates in Wicker Park are much lower, right? And so you can get more if you turn 12-month rental in Wicker Park into a monthly rental, but you can't double it. You can pretty much double it in Bridgeport and definitely in Pilsen. And I think it's just definitely the proximity, but also even if they know, okay, Wicker Park has more of the trendy restaurants or things like that, they're in the city on an out of town assignment, mostly because of work, and not so much maybe for, a couple is living in Wicker Park to be able to enjoy this certain park with their young child, things like that.
I love that. What an interesting approach. I've seen, that could probably apply how you compared where you're at to Wicker Park, or you compare 26 blocks north versus 26 blocks south if you go directly from downtown. Like, it's such a great concept of
McKinley Park and Logan Square are kind of the same.
Yeah, that's great, but the price points are worlds apart. So
yeah, that's nuts. So what you started moving when you're looking, like, let's say you see something in Bridgeport, what catches your eye, right? Like, is how do you know that this condo, this 4-unit, whatever it's going to be, is going to pencil out nicely for me? Is it a very similar exercise as someone who's going to do a long-term buy and hold, and you're just plugging in different rental numbers? Or are there other attributes that our listeners should be aware of if they're looking to implement this strategy?
Definitely. I think we are much more okay with smaller units. Actually, sometimes we prefer them, a 500 square foot studio versus a 700 square foot. I mean, when we're paying the utilities, I mean, it actually is a benefit from that perspective, but also, when you're looking at, say, a 1-bedroom versus a 2-bedroom, there's obviously a significant price bump when you're looking at a 12-month rental, and there's going to be a little bit of a bump when you're looking at a monthly rental. But a lot of the times these 2 bedrooms are booked just because they're available, and it's only actually one person or one couple who's not really even using the other bedroom, and it's only because it's because it's available for the dates, right? And so we very much prefer a 1-bedroom because the increase that we can get versus the 12-month rent on that is really significant versus a 2-bedroom where we're kind of looking at the same top line from a monthly perspective, but obviously the multiplier is not there because the long-term rental is going to definitely rent for more. And actually, that's, I think Mark, you might have mentioned it. I have one long-term rental, and the rest of the 35 are the monthly furnished. The reason why it's a long-term rental is because it's a 3-bed, 2-bath. And so you definitely can get monthly rentals for a 3-bed, 2-bath, but it's not as common for groups to travel together for 2 and 3 months at a time as it is just an individual person. And so it didn't make sense when considering everything to try to get this $2,600 a month unit to $5,200 a month. You're going to get, there's not enough of an audience, I think, for that it would probably be less profitable after utilities, after the management, after, maybe you're getting 3 weeks vacant in December. For me, it just intuitively made more sense to keep that as a long-term rental.
So is that like the redheaded stepchild of your portfolio, like in your mind, because you're making so much more? Like, hey, have you contemplated like selling that one? Like, is that just kind of part of a mix?
Well, that's one of the units in the 7-unit building.
Okay, that's not the one building. Okay, I got you. I follow you.
Right.
So it's the redheaded stepchild in that. That's got to do with all the traffic.
I tried initially to rent it to someone who'd be able to manage the rest of them.
Oh yeah.
We kind of went down that path, but we had a lot more not limitations, but bigger considerations on the refinance that led us to renting it for full market rent.
That kind of brings you, it's a good kind of segue into the finance piece. Talk to us about that. I know you may have talked about banking and stuff like that before. What's that journey been like, kind of shifting from long-term to short-term and having to refinance, and like, are they just looking at cash? How does that in the comparable properties? Like, how do they figure that out?
Yeah, it's really tough. So dealing with, in the 6 to 15 unit space, you really, when you're doing value add, you're likely going to go with a local bank, a commercial lender who's, not a Fannie or Freddie. And so from that perspective, they are willing to have the conversation that you're not going to have 12-month leases in place. But they're very interested in how you're going to achieve that and what your track record is. I would say that they are a bit more receptive to the idea nowadays because so many other investors are employing a similar strategy. But I think the bigger challenge, and where I do a lot of, where I focus a lot of my time during that refinance process is right before the appraisal, because I don't think it'll ever be where they're going to be able to evaluate or consider your monthly furnished top line and your actual expenses, it's going to be maybe a decade until they stray from evaluating commercial properties that are rented on a 12-month basis. And so, when we're doing the BRRRR method by rehab, rent, refinance, the last two R's for us are flipped because so we refi before we rent because there's just too many things.
And they give you the 12-month market rent. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's a lot of risk there because you don't have a firm lease. And so that is such a driver of value when you're looking at what their NOI and then cap rate multiplier is, that you want to make sure that they're giving you a fair estimate on these 6 different units, say, market rents. And so what I do is I take an appraisal report and I basically put our estimates in there. I have a broker friend pull closed market comps. And I actually use the appraiser's same format on adjustments on plus $50 a month for X, Y, and Z, plus $100 a month because it's washer dryer, minus $100 because the floors are X, Y, or Z, right? And I do the same I try to get other appraisal reports as well. Like I'll look to see if there's a building nearby that's sold. I try to reach out to that owner, that new owner, and say, hey, did you get an appraisal for this? My name's Rishi. I have this building. We're going through a refi. But there's even resources beyond that. One of my scrappier things that I did was, if there are not too many sales, just kind of dig deeper and see if there's been a refi. Because, it's not as easy to find, but if you go on the deed recorder and what are the 8 or 10 or whatever units, apartment unit buildings that might have been rehabbed recently, they might have done an appraisal as well. So you reach out to there. So I got an awesome appraisal report from there. And if you're able to put everything in the appraiser's language and their format and substantiate it, and walk through the appraisal process with them, so that if they have any questions and they know that you have a track record and have done it before, you de-risk that part of the refi a lot.
That's great advice regardless. I know you have like the extra obstacle here to deal with, and you found a way to combat that, which is just phenomenal. But for anyone doing a refi, everything there is very prevalent. And we've talked about it multiple times on this show. Like, you do all this work, you find a property, you do all this, and then like that appraisal, the three of us can look at a building. Mark thinks it's worth $700K. You think it's worth $800. I think it's worth $750. We're all justified by different comps. Like, it's a $100K spread. Like, you're pissing away $100K if you don't put in the time to do this. Like after you're like, oh, should I do the $200 light fixture? $250, like, and then we just like the biggest variable. We just, all right, let's leave it to chance. Like it's insane to me. Like that's the part where you got to buckle down and like really put in the time. On the refi, on a purchase, for those purchasing a deal, it doesn't really matter. It's on when we're talking about when you do a refi. That's when you really have to do everything we're talking about here.
When you're looking to buy these buildings, like how do you underwrite like the vacancy? Like what's your calculation on that?
Yeah, so vacancy rate, occupancy rate, there's a big asterisk with that. I'll say our physical occupancy tends to hover between 80 and 85%. But a lot of that is November and December are always our slowest ones. We try to encourage a multi-month one that spans through those. I'm trying to figure out different ways on how to do that because that'll make it jump up to 90. But in general, monthly rentals during those 2 months are tough to come by. But because Airbnb has the ability to adjust rates so much, it's that occupancy vacancy number. It's just a lot of nuance to it because, already right now we have our rates right around Thanksgiving as, we're just trying to cover the costs during that kind of 3 to 4 week stretch, right before Thanksgiving and right before Christmas. After Christmas, a lot of more people will move in, but because you can adjust the rates so easily and so real time, I think it artificially bumps up the occupancy number. And so I don't ever kind of quote, here's the rate and here's the occupancy, because we can change the rate so much.
It's more about like potential versus actual, potential revenue versus actual. And okay, that makes more sense. And you're almost like a percentage of actual income, I guess, not so much the nights stayed there. What,
I would say that's unique to Chicago though, too. I mean, we know what our winters are like. And so if you're in for whoever's listening who has Chicago properties and other around the States, I would say that you're probably not going to get that much of a drop off on a monthly rent in Texas. But in Chicago, I do feel like, if someone has a choice of internship, or more commonly, if they have the choice of where to do their 13-week travel nurse assignment on these dates, they're going to choose Chicago in the spring or the summer and maybe do a southeastern state during that time.
So just let me confirm here. So the price that you're adjusting, that's not your brain power. That's you're utilizing Airbnb and the different places to adjust, like what's gonna no different than Uber on the peak moments. Similar concept, right? So you're able to leverage that technology to be able to be smarter than you to help you get the place rented, right?
Well, I do it manually. I mean, just clicking, okay, we're reducing from $90.
So there's not, so I'm very unfamiliar. So Airbnb is not suggesting pricing based on stuff being filled or not.
They are, and they always suggest 30% lower just because right? But it's definitely a good point, because it's very different from, I think, short-term rental operators, ones who are renting for 2 and 3 nights. They can utilize large data sets and get actual insights. And there's so many providers out there that give actual intelligent kind of price predictions that'll increase their profitability. With monthly rentals, I feel like even now, just none of those data sets work. I'm still doing it by feel and manually. So in terms of what I do on a day-to-day, I still manage all the leasing and I handle all the pricing. And it's something that I look at every day. After it's leased, then I have guest communications are handled and only escalated to me when necessary. But I definitely want to keep a close eye on the leasing process and the pre-booking messages and things like that, because we have now a portfolio that if people are looking for these certain dates, you kind of have to massage it, like offer a discount if they were to start 1 week earlier? Or does it make sense that even if it's only one person, should we offer them a 2-bedroom one that becomes vacant only 2 days prior, sacrifice the rates, but we only have 3 days vacant if they were to go into that, slightly upgraded or larger unit? Just looking at the portfolio of kind of more holistically. I don't know that I'll be able to ever have put a science to it or a really firm methodology. I'm just looking at it real time and thinking, I think this would optimize it better. So let's offer this discount for this.
Yeah. Figure out some algorithms and package that thing up. People will buy it. So yeah. One thing we didn't talk about is you're doing this from New York, right? You have Chicago roots. You were here, but now you're doing all of this out of state, 36 units, and it's more intense than what we're used to hearing with 36 units. Just as you mentioned, the turnover, the cleaning, optimizing pricing. You don't just sign a lease once a year. Like, you are constantly making decisions. Well, how have you been able to do that? Right. That's something that's pretty impressive.
Appreciate that. I mean, it's not nearly as smooth as maybe as you're kind of making it out to be. I appreciate kind of that notion, though.
He's blushing.
I will caveat that I didn't move from Chicago until I had, I believe it was 3 buildings. And so a lot of the processes, a lot of the things that we established were when I was there and could actually oversee them. And also the other big caveat is that I'm in Chicago maybe, 1 out of every 6 weeks. And if we have a rehab going on, I'm there a lot more. But the people are the most important thing. And I think the team that we have and the boots on the ground, what's most important, not most important, but what is a lot more important to me than maybe to other investors is just their willingness and kind of ability to utilize technology and not being adverse to sending pictures and videos, and not only sending, but also being receptive to reviewing what had been done in the unit prior and reviewing the video of what it was before, reviewing these pictures of what it was before and during, because these things I document and I try to keep organized. That's another thing that I do every day, is just try to figure out another way to make everything accessible. And I try to provide as much relevant information on the front end, but what I've found is that what's more important is you really have to figure out what they're going to actually review, and put it in a way that you highlight what you think is most important, more so than just being comprehensive with everything.
Love it. Good stuff there. One more random question before you jump in, Mark. So I know every time I use an Airbnb, they have a little book of here's where you go eat, here's where you do this, here's how you turn on the TV. I'm assuming you still have to do the same process, even though these are professionals and not just, Aunt Susie going on vacation here. Is there just that starter kit put together to kind of foolproof the unit?
Yeah, I think the foolproofing definitely begins from the construction. You kind of want to make sure that everything is intuitive and know that if something has a quirk or if something is delicate and you have to send a reminder, oh, hey, be careful with this thing, you're better off spending whatever, if it's $1,000 to put a whole new gate, you're so much more better off, because that thing will break. There's just, the first 3-4 days after a new resident arrives are always the times where I know that we're going to get questions. And after that 4-day span, if everything's smooth, then it's probably going to stay smooth for the rest of the time. But yeah, we have, I would say that our house manual or guide, things like that, is probably too much information, because the things that you have to explain a bit too much, they should probably be changed to something that's a lot more intuitive. Some of the things we intentionally don't put, because as I just kind of alluded to, I think what's more important than being comprehensive is highlighting the things that that they're going to actually review, because not everyone reviews everything. We get a lot of international bookings, and for example, it's maybe not common in other parts of the world to have cordless blinds. So we're not going to necessarily say, here's how you pull down the blinds and rotate them, because they don't have a cord and you actually have to lift them up and pull them down. But if we get that question, we have a canned response and video guide on how to do it, because overwhelming these residents with information, it doesn't make for a good kind of first few days experience. And so we try to do things on as needed, but when it is requested or you see that it is necessary, you have kind of an immediate guide that comes our way.
One thing we started doing with that, a lot of people have a hard time going from the regular old school thermostats to Nest. So now we put a little QR code to scan them. But the sad thing is a lot of people are like, I don't know how to work this code on the wall. So the same people that can't work the actual Nest, is something we tried and we do it from time to time, but it's funny how we get to complain about the technology. We're trying to explain how to use the technology.
Especially when it's, I mean, the minimalist look for everything. It's like, you don't know that the thing's gonna click and then you don't want them to pull it off the wall.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot there. So I know, Mark, we got to wrap here, but for anyone looking to do these midterm rentals, I think this is the first time we've covered it. And there's so much here that I didn't know. But I think this will be probably one of our more downloaded episodes here. Yeah,
for sure. But we got to wrap because we're getting towards our 45-minute ADD for our listeners.
I think we're over that. Let's do it. Let's wrap this.
All right. Awesome. All right. So what's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to be so successful in these midterm rentals and others haven't been?
I think really just being present at the job site and living at the job site whenever, maybe that's not something that's possible for many people that are local and have families, but the amount of familiarity that you get with the property and things that you can kind of be proactive about when you're actually living there and using the space. And I guess my willingness to do that and to live in a dusty place. And I actually also, the one GC that I work with, I handle all the materials purchasing. So coordinating that is an absolute bear. But you learn so much about the maintenance piece and the ongoing management from just getting familiarity with every piece of material that goes into it. So I think that's absolutely something that someone starting out should consider doing if they're doing one of their first few rehabs.
Love it.
What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first midterm rental here in Chicago?
One piece of advice. Let's say if it's their first property, it's just to be receptive to or be open to different ways of renting it. Don't close one strategy off and realize that maybe short-term would work for the summer and then you want to turn into maybe a 6-month rental but furnished rental. I mean, something that's even more of a hybrid of a long-term to a medium-term rental. There's the optionality when you do furnish it is awesome. And the ability to go back and to not be afraid to go back to a long-term rental if that's what the market decides, because that $8,000 that you spent is not going to be necessarily just gone with a poof. It might actually end up being more profitable to not really. I'm going on and on, but I would say just be open to different rental strategies just based on what you're seeing in the market and what makes the most money.
Awesome. When you're not being scrappy and successful, what do you do for fun?
I try to play tennis a couple times a week. I'm a big skier. I go out west about twice a year. Travel. My wife, we just got back from Spain over July 4th with a few of my college friends. A nice kind of group trip that's not as common when you're this age. So those things keep me busy. I mean, and that's in between my Southwest flights to Chicago that I end up changing the times on almost every single time I book it.
Awesome.
When you're on that Southwest flight, what's a good book or podcast or a self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners?
I only recently started listening to more short-term focused podcasts. I mean, of course, yours. Jon Kasman's. It's not a short-term podcast, but his is. I mean, your podcast, Jon Kasman's. I think it's Target Market Insights, and then obviously the bigger podcast ones. But the short-term ones, If you can't, I mean, I'm listening to maybe 4 hours of podcasts a day.
Wow.
The short-term ones are, I think it's the Short-Term Show by 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. That the idea that I got for the relocation company is the one where we just got the first booking, where I'm really excited about. I got that idea from one of her podcast guests, and I think it's really great because a lot of these short-term podcasts only focus on the rental arbitrage or actually hosting, and they just give you a bunch of tips. Hers, sometimes there's syndicators on there. Sometimes there's people doing vacation rentals. Sometimes they're doing hybrid models. They're interviewing a lot of people who are employing the strategy, but in different ways, and gives you kind of a good landscape of what's out there.
All right. Besides yourself, name one person in your network that you'd highly recommend to other Chicago investors as a quality resource.
Sure. So just mentioned we got through a pretty big refinance. I would say, and it was with a new bank that we hadn't worked with before, that I think did a really great job kind of being receptive to the idea of how we're renting and thinking outside the box. It was International Bank of Chicago, 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃, Hubbard like the street, I guess. I think it's spelled the same. But really, any commercial lender, they have such a great pulse on the market and where there's transactions. And it's a set of knowledge that an investor, it's tough to get as an investor because they're not getting the inbound information like they are. And so you can get a lot of kind of trends or insight into what trends and what neighborhoods are ripe for development or good for a value add or ones to stay away from if you have a pretty good contact as a commercial lender.
Eric is awesome. If you're an Asian real estate investor, you gotta know him. Like literally the bank's an Asian bank. Like, and they actually do a lot of loans for out of country type developers as well too. And they do favor. That's probably the wrong way to word this for so many reasons, but they have a lot of Asia relationships.
I forgot to mention he was an introduction from Mark, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah, no, he's awesome. He's a good guy. No, he's a great networker. We should have him on the show. Actually.
Sure.
There we go. So Rishi, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Sure. Always looking for boots on the ground. If they've got referrals around Bridgeport, Pilsen, always interested in different partnership opportunities. Mark mentioned I'm partnered with one of his friends, Zach, and in any capacity. And I guess you can get in touch, send me a message on LinkedIn or my website, 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃.com.
Zach is also somebody we need to get on the show. So
there we go.
That might be the third mention of you saying that.
Yeah, I know. And he just is laughing when he's listening. I know he listens to it, even though he might say it's not. So, all right. You know what? I randomly pick somebody for the question here every week, and I coincidentally picked the person that just literally ordered a shirt and shorts like literally 3 hours ago.
All right.
So it all goes into, I just do the email scan and I roll it and whoever lands on. So 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃 bought a pair of shorts. But the funny thing that I went
𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 is a friend of mine growing up, by the way. And we went to grade school and high school together, and he was at our 100th. He was at our 100th event. So yeah, Tim, get a shout out here. It's 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃.
He's up in what's he, North Center there? It looks like his address. So, but it's funny when you order shorts in the picture of the guy in there, it looks like you're ordering like brief underwear. So the picture, I always think like, oh man, guy with underwear. Somebody bought it. So, all right, Tim, this one's out for you, Tim. Let's hear the question. You can't go easy.
Better get this right now.
All right.
So we got because Chicago, New York pizza. I went with a pizza one here. So Mark, I didn't know deep dish pizza. It's only been around since 1943. It's relatively new, but the first restaurant to serve deep dish pizza was Pizzeria Uno, Illuminati's, Giordano's, or Connie's.
I feel like you've asked this question before, or I've had this as it's Uno.
It is Pizzeria Uno. Have we asked this before?
I feel like we have. You're right.
All right. Well, my boy Tim gets his Lenovo gift card.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I joked
There you
around saying
go.
it was Pizzeria Duo, but that was the joke last time I thought I made a conversation. So, all right, Tim, you get a gift card to go with your underwear. Awesome. All right, Rishi, awesome show, Tom. Awesome. Listeners, please listen. I'm going to get excited here. Refer us to a friend. Leave us a review. I can't track you referring us to a friend, but I can track how many downloads we have. And we do go up some, and we kind of hit a leveling out here. And that means you guys are not referring us out to enough people. So please continue to share this. When you see us post, Javier is always on there putting good stuff all over 𝗤𝗍𝗃 Realty and Straight Up Chicago online. Please repost those things. You comment, we'll take thumbs up, don't get me wrong, but repost that so your network can see what we are putting out there. So again, thank you very much to our guest today. And then Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, we will see you next week.
Thanks all.